Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. I think I've talked about this before, that when you read the Genesis account of creation, often we tend to think that we are being given the exact nature or the mechanics of how creation happened. I don't think that's what it's about. Scripture is not about that. Scripture is about a witness to Jesus Christ, as we'll see just now. So when we read the words that the earth was formless and empty and was covered in darkness, and God did not see that as right, and he said, "Let there be light," and there was light. I believe that this light was a light that we're going to look at just now. So the message of Genesis 1, chapter 2, verse 2 and 3, was about introducing us. So if you read Genesis 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3, we get introduced to the main characters of human life. We get to know about how the world was created, how we have the suns and the moons and so on, how we have the different animals, how man is in the state that man is in through sin, how man came to be male and female, and all the things that are mentioned in those first three chapters. So when you read those first three chapters, you get introduced to the rest of Scripture. And that's the first theme, therefore, of Scripture, is the idea of darkness and light. Okay? The first theme of Scripture is that the world was dark, and God said, "Let there be light." And this darkness, when you go to the book of Jeremiah, you find that it was actually a prefiguration of the darkness in which Israel and the world were going to be in as a result of sin. Okay? So in the book of Jeremiah 4, verse 23, we read, "I looked at the earth." Remember, it says, in the beginning, the earth was formless and void, and darkness hovered over the face of the deep. It says in Jeremiah 4, verse 23, "I looked at the earth, and it was formless and empty." So God looks again on the earth, and once again, it is formless and is empty. The same expression we saw in Genesis. In the Greek, in the Hebrew, it is tohu and bohu. So the earth was tohu and bohu, formless and empty. And at the heavens, and their light was gone. Okay? So when God looked down on the earth, it was dark. The light of the world was gone. Okay? Now what does God do? We saw what God does in Genesis. When there is darkness, God says, "Let there be light." And there is light. So when the Israel and the whole world was in darkness, because this passage here, if you have the time, you can go and read the whole chapter of Jeremiah 4. It starts by describing the state in which Israel was. Israel was steeped in sin. And this sinfulness of Israel, and indeed the rest of the world, was described by God as a world or the earth being formless and empty and in the darkness. So what was God's answer to that? Okay, we'll see just now. I mentioned that the scriptural account from Genesis to Revelation is about witnessing to who Jesus is, what he has done. I think I've mentioned this before, that all scripture is a witness to the birth, the life, the death, the resurrection, the ascension, and the coming again of Jesus Christ. So when we read the scriptures, we should always be looking to find Jesus explained to us. And I find that in Genesis and in Jeremiah, as we saw, the light that is being mentioned is the true light that was to come. So the light that God creates in Genesis, okay, that's the point I want you to not miss. The light that God creates in Genesis was a shadow of the true light that was to come. Okay? So when we read about God saying, "Let there be light on the earth," God was prefiguring the time when he was going to introduce his son, who is the true light to the world on earth. And that's how God introduces that. So God's answer to the darkness is what we read in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 9, Isaiah is described as the gospel of the Old Testament, because it is in the book of Isaiah that we find the most prophecies about Jesus about his birth even. It is in Isaiah that we are told that a virgin shall conceive and will give birth, and the son will be called Emmanuel. Okay? And Matthew quotes Isaiah when he talks about that. So in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1 and 2, we read, "Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom." Okay? There will be no more darkness for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee, okay, of the nations, by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Now, this very passage is quoted in Matthew chapter 4. Matthew takes this passage and says this passage was written by Isaiah to talk about Jesus. That Jesus is the one who comes so that there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. And you remember Jesus, it says when Jesus' parents came back from Egypt, they settled in Galilee so that he will be called the Galilean. It was a quote of this passage in Isaiah, that in future he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea. The people walking in the darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Okay? So when we go into the New Testament, we are told that indeed Jesus is the answer to the darkness of Israel, the darkness of the world. He becomes the true light that God sends. So God says in the darkness of the world, let there be light. And that light was Jesus. And the birth of Jesus is the coming of that light. Okay? The book of John chapter 1, John talks about this light. He says from verse 4 in chapter 1, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The life of Jesus, according to John, was the light for all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, he says, and the darkness has not overcome it. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world in the coming of Jesus. So the birth of Jesus was the coming of the true light into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. So the reason today many are still living in darkness, the reason today that the world is still in the state that it is in, is because the world did not recognize the light that came. And sadly, many Christians around the world have not realized that the light has come, that they walk in the light, as we'll see just now, and they still walk in the darkness. And Christmas is a reminder to us that the true light has come, and we should no longer walk in the darkness. Let us not be like those who don't know, who have not recognized that the light of the world has come. Okay? So if Jesus was the Christmas light that came into the dark world, so what, some might say? What does it matter? Is it something that we should just read about theologically and understand? What does it mean for us as Christians? That is the part I want to focus on. Because many Christians think when we read about the light that come into the world in the person of Jesus, this is something nice to hear about. It has nothing to do with me as a Christian. And that's a sad thing for Christians to say. Because Christmas, its message, is about the light that has come into the world to light the path for us. And as you'll see just now, it has serious implications in terms of how we are Christians in the world. Okay? Jesus explained his coming in this way in John chapter 12 and verse 46. He said, I have come into the world as a light. Okay? Jesus, this is how he explains why he came. He says, I have come into the world as a light. For what purpose? He explains why he came as a light into the world. He says, so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. Jesus came and was born into the world as a light. For what reason? So that anyone who believes in Jesus should not stay in darkness anymore. Jesus came, Jesus was born, so that you do not stay in darkness. I think this is a central message that Christians should know. That the coming of Jesus was for the reason that they should not stay in darkness. This is what Jesus himself said. I have come into the world as a light, so that those who believe in me should not stay in darkness. And I think this is a message of Christmas we should not take lightly. Jesus has come, was born, so that we should not stay and live in darkness anymore. If you believe in Jesus, you may no longer stay in darkness. Jesus says that is why he came. That is the reason Jesus was born. That is the message of Christmas. Okay? Many have questioned why we have the so-called Christmas lights. Okay? The story of the Christmas lights comes from the Christmas light. Okay? Jesus is the light of Christmas. So when you see all these lights shining in the streets in town or in people's homes, I want you to remember that those are pointing towards the true light that came into the world in the message of Christmas. And that light was Jesus. And his coming was so that you and I should no longer live in darkness. But how do we stay out of darkness? As Christians, how do we make this a reality? That the coming of Jesus, which was meant to move us out of darkness into light, how does that take effect in our lives? Let's go to the book of 1 John, chapter 1, verse 5 to 7. He says, this is the message we have heard. Okay, I want you to notice this. John says, this is the message we have heard from Jesus. What was the message they heard from Jesus? That God is light,